background in journalism, and he's going to talk to us about CWD communications. I know a lot of us are waiting with bated breath for this one. So here, thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for having me here. Okay. Like Jennifer said, my name is Lindsay Thomas. I am Director of Communications for the Quality Deer Management Association. We're one of the species nonprofits, and whitetails are our specialty. Our headquarters, national headquarters, is in Athens, Georgia, here in Georgia, so I'm glad to be able to be here with you. Thank you all for visiting Georgia, and welcome to those of you who haven't been here before. Real quick, I just want to cover with you here today a strategy that we came up with for dealing with chronic wasting disease and trying to inform our audiences about this serious issue for whitetails. I would imagine many of you have dealt with this issue before. So, to get this, those of you who are laughing, I can probably guess, have dealt with CWD in your social media and your other communications. It's a very contentious issue, extremely controversial. The unfortunate thing is there's a lot of misinformation out there. There are actually some bad actors who intentionally inject misinformation into this discussion, who have agendas based for various reasons on other issues. And so it's an uphill battle in many ways, sharing information about CWD and informing deer hunters about it, getting the facts to them, and sort of cutting through the murk. So we started a little over a year ago looking at how we might go about coming up with a communication campaign to sort of cut through the BS on this issue and really give hunters the information they need. So I did some digging. This was some of the first information I came across, and some of you may be familiar with this already, but there's a lot of good research out there on the human dimension side of this in psychology about how to approach a myths versus facts situation when you're trying to replace falsehoods or misperceptions with true facts. How do you root those out and replace them with the information you want? Well, what psychologists have found in their research is that many times these falsehoods, these conspiracy theories, this misinformation is sort of like a weed seed in the central nervous system. It's very difficult to root out. You don't just tell someone that, hey, that's not true. Because what psychologists have found is literally when you approach someone and say, this fact that you think is a fact, this statement that you believe is actually false, having mentioned the myth or misconception, you have subconsciously reinforced it in that person's central nervous system. And so many times people who went through focus groups and other things with the intention of replacing falsehoods with facts, days and weeks later, these people still believed the initial myth or misconception. It wasn't replaced at all, merely having discussed it reinforced it in their subconscious. You might Google this title if you wanted to find this particular article is a good summary of a lot of that research that we looked at. But the bottom line that came out of a lot of this was, when you're trying to replace a misconception with fact, don't repeat the myth or misconception. So a myth versus facts approach is really not a great way to go about it. You don't approach someone and say, hey, you believe X, but let me tell you that that's false. That's the wrong way to go about it. So this really informed some of the first designs of our initial campaign last year. A couple of pull quotes from that particular article. Participants who had been told 3 times that a statement was false were more likely to accept it as true than were those who had only been told once. So the more times they heard it, even being told it was false, the more it was reinforced in that weed seed, those roots that it's putting down. It's difficult to eradicate. So the guidance again was repeat the correct information, not the misinformation one wants to undermine. And additionally, they advise that you do this often, repeat this information regularly, but also carve it up into digestible bites of information. Don't give someone a long paragraph they have to read. Don't give them, make it digestible, make it easy. And like many of us know as communicators, pairing it with an image or an infographic often sort of gives it something to attach to. So you're helping replant that new information. So we came up with what we call the No CWD Campaign, hashtag KNOWCWD. Here's just a few samples of some on Twitter. We did this on Twitter, we did it on Facebook, we did it on Instagram, we did it in our e-newsletter, in our magazine, our website. website, basically every outlet we had. So a lot of these are just sort of factoids. Now, I haven't gone into the basics of CWD here. I don't know how many of you feel already intimately familiar with chronic wasting disease and the ins and outs. So we're not going to really cover that, we don't have really time, but the slide I showed at the beginning is actually the homepage of QDMA's CWD information page. If you want to familiarize yourself with the basics, go to qdma.com/CWD. We sort of outlined all that there as a resource for hunters. So I'm not really going to go through a lot of that, but here's just a few that we summarized in quick snippets of information and began putting those out there repeatedly over and over and over. And that worked pretty well. From April to October of last year, the total No CWD campaign got almost 1 million impressions for us, counting all social media channels, video, counting our e-newsletter that goes out weekly, counting article website is the total, 1 million impressions. Unfortunately, even facts like this can be difficult for some people to swallow. CWD is a difficult situation. There's not a lot of hope and happiness in this story. And so a lot of the facts you share aren't necessarily things people want to hear. And when people don't want to hear things, they tend to often turn to other sources of information. And as y'all know, this is a lot of what's going on with CWD today. It just so happened that late summer last year, I came across this article. How many of you are familiar with the Neiman Journalism Lab? Anyone? A few? Go and sign up for this free e-newsletter. If you don't get it, I highly recommend it. Most of the time, most of the articles they share are not really relevant to us as natural resource communicators, but many times I have found information in these articles that are helpful to what I do, and this has been a huge one. So this researcher looked at, well, you see the title, how media coverage of epidemics helps raise anxiety and reduce trust. And specifically, he was looking at Ebola and how coverage of Ebola affected people who received the information. And what he found was that even facts and information, even not necessarily sensationalized information, but just interesting facts and information about Ebola, if it didn't provide a sense of hope, if it didn't provide a what to do action to protect yourself, tended to drive people to alternative sources. And we all know what those alternative sources are. Somebody who sells a better story. Hey, so things are dark and gloomy, well, I've got a quick fix for you, just listen to me. And many times it's, pay me, give me some money, I'll give you a solution. And in the case of Ebola, we're talking about people going to faith healers, the local shaman or whoever, who tells them, with my 11 herbal spices, I can cure Ebola. And that's what they found in this study, is that it was, depending on the type of information, often drove people to alternative sources of information. A few folks telling people about scary diseases without informing them about ways to protect themselves is a good way to cause anxiety and emotional distress, and a bad way to build trust in government health agencies. During an outbreak, in the absence of accurate information, people may look to alternative sources that are dangerously misleading, saying, for example, that Ebola can be cured using plants and herbs. We had a good example of this just back in February. How many of you saw the press conference in Pennsylvania that was called to announce that CWD, a cure was coming? A few of you, a lot of you. This was bogus, based on some research that's out of far left field that has been basically debunked by the primary CWD researchers in the country, but a particular group who actually had sort of an anti-Pennsylvania Game Commission leaning decided to hold a press conference and pull a stunt and announce, along with a GoFundMe campaign, of course, to give to them, that a cure was on the way. Within a year, we would have a field test and a vaccine for CWD. Of course, totally false. So a lot of us, many of you, and certainly us, had to go into a denial campaign and a hey, don't listen to this is not right, and begin to try to share information about what really causes CWD. Nobody wants a cure to appear on the horizon more than us, I promise you. But this is the perfect example of what this researcher found. People wanted to hear that. Great, there's a cure. And we're still dealing with this today. You post CWD information and some people go, huh, what? I heard this was cured. I thought they had a vaccine. Why are we still talking about this? That's a great and easy story to sell. That it's over, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Anybody can sell that story. It's our story that's more difficult to tell. I found that providing audiences with articles that include information about risks and solutions both individual and organizational, can improve people's intention to comply with health recommendations during an epidemic. So I really, at this point, after reading this article, I put the brakes on the No CWD campaign. I said, wait a minute, we've got to do something different. So what we did was we sat down and we came up with the Fight CWD campaign. We literally listed a long list of bullet point actions that every hunter can take in this country to help in the fight against CWD. Whether they live in a CWD state and are already affected by it, or whether they live in a state like Georgia, which has not yet found CWD. We took this list, we vetted it with experts, Brian Richards with the USGS, Kristen Schuler with Cornell, SQUIDIS, which is the Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study Unit at the University of Georgia, luckily right there in our hometown. We had access to a number of top experts to help us with this list. We worked on it, we revised it, we got it refined. We posted it as a blog post on our website, the entirety of the list, but then we began taking each bullet and breaking it down to items like this one. This was one of the earliest ones. This actually was wrapping up the No CWD campaign here. And by the way, anybody here from Arkansas Game and Fish Commission? No? Anyway, they loaned us this image of one of their CWD testing boxes. But this was the blog post we did additionally. Every deer hunter can take these steps to fight CWD. And we began building, these are some of the infographics that we built to go with this, a whole bunch of them. We did tweets, we did posts on Instagram, we did Facebook, we had the blog post. We featured these weekly in our e-newsletter. One of the ones on the left is report sick deer quickly. This is a big one. We were hearing people literally say in some areas, and people with large social media followings saying, hey, if you see a sick deer, don't say anything. Because if you do, your state agency is going to come in and try to eradicate the deer. So keep that quiet. And y'all, that's the most dangerous thing anybody could do. The worst thing you could do is if you saw a deer that did have CWD and you didn't report it, if that's one of the first deer in the area that has it, there's actually a chance that the agency can respond quickly enough and stop that from spreading and literally contain it. It has happened in a couple of instances. It happened in New York. Just recently, Missouri. Anybody here from Missouri? Over here? Just recently, Missouri actually backed down CW regs from a couple of counties because the one positive they found in that county, they hadn't found any additional positives in the ensuing, 5 years, I think it was. So they actually backed off of that. So if you find it early enough, you actually can stop it. So reporting sick deer is incredibly important. Another big one, if you're traveling out of state to hunt. I saw Chuck Sykes over here with a sticker on his Yeti that says, don't bring CWD back home to Alabama. That's a great campaign. Many states that don't have it and counties that don't have it, that's a big one. Please don't bring carcasses from another state, particularly a CWD state, back home with you. This is a good way to transport CWD. So getting the word out, this has been one of the difficulties is hunters who are affected by this are already mostly very aware of this. Hunters like me here in Georgia who are a long way from any CWD areas generally are more ignorant. And really it's the hunters who don't live in these areas who can play a bigger role by not transporting carcasses around. By taking this reporting sick deer and doing other things that can help. The picture on the right, by the way, came from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Anyone here with PGC? Thank y'all for that image. Again, several different iterations of what to do if you're traveling out of state to hunt. Not only find out if you're going to a CWD area, but if you are, find out the local regs. Find out what you do with the deer if you harvested there. Many times we're driving them to y'all, we're saying go to that state agency's website and find out those regulations. Don't leave there with the deer. And then of course, there's the personal health concern. CDC recommends that if you hunt one of the areas, you get every deer tested that you harvest, and you wait for results before you consume that venison. We don't yet have evidence that CWD has affected any people, but the health experts are still urging caution and saying, look, just don't take that risk. Don't eat the deer that was CWD positive. So we're trying to get that word out there. And then here's, of course, another one. If you come back home with venison, and the test results come in and it was positive, what do you do with all the venison in your freezer? That was one that even at first we were like, we don't know that. What do you do? Well, of course, you try to put it somewhere that's out of reach of any deer for the foreseeable future, preferably a landfill, but many state wildlife agencies have disposal methods and other things that they would recommend. So again, we send these folks to y'all. Go talk to your state agency and find out what to do with that. Wild deer don't wear jewelry. Trying to urge hunters, hey, if you see a deer that might have escaped from a captive facility, this is one of the risk factors in this is captive facilities that might have animals in it that have been transported across long distances. So if you see a deer that is wearing an ear tag, please report that to your state agency. Again, early detection is critical. Urging people to participate in your own testing and monitoring and voluntary programs. And back to the, trying to have a positive outlook. We looked at it this way. CWD has been found in only 8% of U.S. counties. So when you look at the totality of counties that have a survey in it that could have CWD, only about 8 to 9% right now are positive. So we're trying to, the picture we're painting is this. The battle line is containing this disease where it currently exists and holding that front line as long as we can while the scientists work on this problem. Personally, I think this will solve this issue. The researchers and scientists that are working on this will find a solution, but it's not coming tomorrow, and it's not coming next week or next year even. But we have to buy them time. And the number one thing that deer owners can do to buy them time is stop the spread. So in terms of a hopeful message, that's the fight. That's the terms that we have couched this into deer hunters is you play a role in this, every single one of you, in helping stop the spread of CWD while the scientists work on this. So again, a hopeful outlook. There's something we can all do on this. That's the theme we have tried to carry forward. Many states have now put up bans on importation of carcasses, so trying to let hunters know that, hey, if you see a scene like this of a deer carcass crossing a state line on an interstate, call someone. That's not legal anymore. I don't care what state you're in. Driving across the state line with a whole deer carcass, I believe every single state now has stopped that. Chuck, do you know, or does anybody else know, are there any states that no longer have that importation ban?
It's pretty close to everybody.
Pretty close to everybody. A lot of the rules are inconsistent, and we need some consistency along that state to state. But most every state now has made it illegal to cross state lines with a full carcass. And this other one, stay informed by signing up. Again, urging them to get with y'all, to follow y'all on social media, to sign up for your e-newsletters, to stay in touch with your state wildlife agency to learn the latest on all of this. We are a national organization and we do our best, but we certainly don't have the level of state-specific information that y'all do. So we want them coming to their state wildlife agency. So real quick in review, don't repeat the myths and misconceptions. And if y'all are working on your CWD campaigns on this, and many of this may not be news to you, but this is what I'd urge all of us to do. Don't repeat the myths and misconceptions. State the facts in simple, concise verse, preferably accompanied by images or infographics to make them more memorable. Provide action items, a way that the audience can help. What should they do about this? Rather than just saying, CWD is always fatal. We did this. We spewed all these facts. CWD is always fatal. CWD spreads rapidly. CWD is a threat to the future of hunting. These are all facts. So when you provide those facts without any kind of, here's what to do, or here's some hope, that's where I feel many of us, and even us, may have driven people to sources that had a better story. Provide a sense of hope by setting a goal, and then repeat, 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 repeat. Do I need to repeat that? Just keep over and over. That's what we have done. The Fight CWD campaign for us continues now, and we're even ramping back up, tweaking some of our infographics going into the fall as deer season approaches. And we don't intend really to quit this for the foreseeable future. So, all of us know when you post on social media or share information, you're going to get some pushback from the typical folks we all know. The conspiracy theorists, the deer breeders who see this as a threat to their industry, and then the anti-government types, the anti-science types, we all know them. We could all sit here and list all the ridiculous arguments and things we hear in response to our posts. My feeling is, and the approach we are taking is, don't bother with them. That's time and energy you could have spent posting additional information, keeping on going, trucking off. Now, certainly there are times when someone replies in good faith with a legitimate question and wants to know more, and you know as well as I that that's an opportunity for you to stop and engage someone, to make a friend, to make a fan, and to provide some additional information to someone who just has a legitimate question. I'm not telling you to ignore them, but the people who obviously are there just to create strife and be a troll, I would move on and don't bother with them. Always remember this, that, yeah, we all get dozens and hundreds and sometimes thousands of these ridiculous comments and reply to CWD information. But if you know from looking at your analytics, and if you go look, you'll see this, many hundreds, many thousands more people got an impression out of that information without having commented on it. And so always think of those people. That's what I try to do, is remember all the thousands of people beyond the commenters who heard me, who digested that information, who maybe agreed with it, or at least listened. And focus on continuing to get down, and don't let the negativity drag you down, not only in terms of consuming time trying to talk to those people, but simply spend your time going forward and posting more information for the people that are with you. Is CWD positive? That's the guy on the far right is Bob Wyland. He's a QDMA member from Wisconsin. A few years ago, he and his buddy had a nice hunt on Bob's property in Wisconsin, killed these 2 bucks on the same day. Both bucks were CWD positive, tested positive. Many times, most of the time really, when I see media, and even us, even y'all sharing information about CWD, what picture do you show?
That sick deer by that bus.
Yes. The bony, skeletal deer that's drooling and walking in a circle or can't even walk or whatever. That image is out there over and over and over again displaying CWD. And the problem is, what we deal with now is hunters think that's what a CWD deer looks like. And if they look like this, the deer in these pictures, oh, well, they don't have CWD. Deer can carry CWD for 1 year to 2 years before those symptoms, the visible symptoms, appear, before they reach that clinical stage. And the worst part is, during that whole year to 2 years, they're contagious. They're spreading the disease to other deer. So many hunters think, well, if I shot a deer and it looked healthy, like these 2 bucks, I don't need to get that tested. I can eat that. I don't need to worry about taking that to another state. It's healthy. So think about the imagery you use. We now avoid using the bony deer shot unless we explain. You know, I'd rather use a shot like this and say, y'all, this deer is CWD positive. This is what a CWD deer positive deer looks like. It looks like a normal deer, doesn't it? And this is why you have to be careful. Reach out to your, are we okay on time, Jennifer?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I urge all of you to reach out to your Deer Project leaders. How many of y'all are with the state wildlife agency in PR communications? Keep your hand up if you're in regular communication with your Deer Project leader. Most of them? Okay, well, I'm very proud to see that. I like that, and that's a good thing. Many times these folks have the information that you may be looking for to supply your informational campaign. And by the way, when I get the chance, I talk to those people as well and tell them to get with you. So I'm not preaching to y'all necessarily. I think the biologists need to know just as well that they need to come hunt you and seek your expertise and your help with getting out the messaging they need to get to your constituents in your state. Just an example, this is from Illinois' website. Anybody here from Illinois, DNR? Not here. This is some of the prevalence rates in some of their CWD positive counties where they are doing what's called targeted sharpshooting, which means that after the season's over, in counties where the hunters didn't meet the quotas that the agency had set, sharpshooters go into areas where they know positive deer have been found before, and they take a few more out, just trying to get a few more positive deer before you go all spring and summer to another hunting season and get them out of the landscape. And what they found, what this shows is that this method is holding prevalence rates in the low single digits in these counties, and that's a very good thing. What that means is any area where you can hold prevalence rate that low for that long. By the way, these areas of Illinois have had CWD just as long as many areas of Wisconsin, and yet they're holding prevalence low. This is good news. And what this means is these herds will support deer harvest by hunters for the foreseeable future. We can maintain prevalence rates that low. So there's good information on your own websites that hunters need to know. I've heard many Illinois hunters say, you know, boy, the state just wants to come in and eradicate deer. No, this is what they're trying to do. And this will sustain deer harvest for the foreseeable future, versus if you do nothing and prevalence rates climb, there is an eventual point. It doesn't come fast, but there's an eventual point where those deer populations, once the prevalence rate gets high enough, can no longer sustain additional mortality of hunting harvest. And so Illinois is doing good work here. There's the actual data from their removal. Hunters think this process is eradicating deer. Look at the numbers of deer removed by county, 52, 24. The most I see on here is what, 160? That's not going to eradicate deer anywhere. 160 deer in a county. Even here in coastal Georgia, where our deer densities are pretty low, that can eradicate the deer population. So the information is there to share with your audiences. Many of y'all have this information. Get it from your Deer Project leader and craft a story that replaces the misconceptions that are out there. So, just as a final comment, what I would say is, you may find some information from what we've learned and what we're doing that might help you in your approaches to how you deal with CWD. You may not. You may already be, each of us, I know, in your own state has different priorities and different stories you're trying to tell. Excuse me. But think about, there's a lot of bad actors out there, people who are working against us. But what I think about is I look around this room, and between me, y'all, and the people who aren't here, who are on our side. How many keys to Facebook accounts there are? How many keys to Instagram accounts and Twitter accounts? How many YouTube channels? How many e-newsletters and websites? The communication power that we represent together, and if we all got on the same page for some basic concepts like these going forward, we would quickly drown out the naysayers on this issue and make a lot of progress here. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'd be happy to take questions if you want.
Thank you. Okay, I think there might be a lot of questions. I have a small list. All right, Kirsten.
I noticed you were using 2 different hashtags up there. Fight CWD was one of them, but early on I thought I saw no CWD. Well, what's the strategy of having the 2 of them, and how do you use the paper?
Yeah, like I said, we started out with no CWD, kind of developing that as a fact campaign, just to get the facts out there to replace the myths and misconceptions. And then as I came across that second article I shared that was about the folks' reaction to information about Ebola, and learn those additional suggestions of providing hope and providing action items, we changed it over to Fight CWD.
So you only use the second?
That's correct. We still, you see no CWD out there, and a lot of other people sort of ran with it and are using it, and that's great. I think we still probably would use both. We're not trying to eradicate that first one. They both are still good, and sometimes we use them together. But since October last year, we've been putting our time and effort into the Fight CWD campaign because, again, the hashtag itself implies there's something to be done, that there's an action you can take and there's a battle and you can join it.
So, I've got a couple real quick. In Tennessee, the news is really bad. It's like prevalence rates are 30 to 40% in some places. And I have such a terrible message to deliver, and I feel like it's not how do you deliver that terrible message and still make people feel empowered, like they can do something about it when they feel like deer hunting is over for their property?
I would get with your deer folks, get with James Kelly, and talk to him about that because they have a plan for what they're going to do there. They're not going to do nothing. And so the number one thing is, for y'all is making sure your hunters know what the agency's getting ready to do, whether it involves sharpshooting, the testing, the monitoring, all the things you want hunters to do, and work on getting the word out about here's the things you can do to help us with this. Yeah, see, unfortunately, Tennessee discovered it at a point where it was well established. You're now in a management phase, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But you've also got counties outside those zones that don't have it yet, to the best of your knowledge, and it's incredibly important for hunters in those areas to be aware of what they can do to prevent the spread. So you've still got a proactive message to share within Tennessee, and Georgia and other states around you have that same message. Look, let's don't bring that. Not only don't bring it into Alabama or Georgia or Kentucky, let's don't bring it from one Tennessee county to a new one. So there's still actions to be taken, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of misinformation, a lot of even anger about the management techniques y'all are going to have to employ in there. There's no good way to deal with this disease. It is a sad situation, and my sympathy goes out to any of the agencies here who are dealing with this. There's no good, no-win situation, and it's very difficult to get your hunters on side with you. So I would just provide as much information as you can about why you're doing what you do and how you hope it will help. There's examples, as I pointed out, in other states that have had success with maintaining low prevalence rates. So share some of that and say, look, this is what we're hoping to try to accomplish. Help us by doing these actions.
Hi, I'm from Wyoming. We struggle with communicating about CWD because we've had conversations about that it's a philosophical shift for hunters who for so long, and even the non-hunting public who accepts hunting because it's for meat. And if you can no longer hunt for meat and you're hunting for as almost a management tool completely, how can we communicate that to the non-hunting public in a way that they will still accept hunting as part of this really important piece of wildlife management, if it's no longer for me?
That is the, what is it, the 800-pound gorilla in the corner of the room, or whatever and that is, what do we do if they find out this disease can cross the species barrier to people? I don't even want to think about it. Our CEO spoke at the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting earlier this year and gave that very talk. Let's look ahead. Let's try to look in the crystal ball and imagine the implications of what would happen if CWD jumped the species barrier and you couldn't eat venison anymore. People were afraid to eat venison. I mean, the implications are enormous, as y'all know. So I haven't even gotten that far myself to think about what would you say to the public, because then it does become simply we're just hunting for management. We're not hunting. The number one reason the public supports deer hunting is when it's done for food. Our highest approval ratings among the public, in the area of 80% approval by the non-hunting public is when you say, do you approve of hunting for food? And if we lose that, yeah, it's a big, big problem. So we're not there yet. Many of the disease experts are still saying that there is strong evidence of a species barrier, but even they will tell you don't eat a positive deer because I'm not 100% certain. So I'm just hopeful that we continue to stay at that status of maybe we think we have a species barrier and never discover that there's not one, because that is a much bigger ball of trouble.
So
But good question.
Yeah. Would you be willing to put like CWD positive deer imagery into a Dropbox folder or something that we could share with everyone, so when this happens in our state, if this happens, then we don't have to scramble and try to find all of this stuff as communicators and like future posts and hashtags and all of that kind of stuff?
We can do that, I'd be glad to do that, but we don't have much. In fact, that's the only CWD positive, healthy looking live whitetail, I think, picture that I've got.
You've got one more than the rest of us have.
Okay. Now, I've got one that Mississippi gave me that's a dead deer that a hunter watched die of CWD, their first case. It's lying there dead. And of course, we know we can go get the bony deer anytime we want those images. Maybe we ought to start some kind of a chat group or something, or a Dropbox, like you said, where states that do have those images, one or two here or there could somehow share those.
I mean, I asked
The
them, they don't have.
CWD Alliance, now I know the CWD Alliance has many of the sick deer images.
Yeah, they have sick
I don't know
deer.
about sort of a healthy deer. Yeah.
I think that would be really valuable. Matt, yes.
Is there a reliable way to test a live deer?
No. No, not currently. That's one of the problems we have, is that it's a fairly, you can, and Chuck or somebody in the room might have to help me here, but I think you can do it, but it's a very invasive test with tissue removal and all of that. And so there's not an easy, reliable field test for a live deer. And that's one of the complicated things in this issue with allowing deer to be trucked around live is there isn't a good live deer test.
And that's one thing that the haters won't throw at us is like, you say it's 100% fatal, how do you know you can't test a live deer? How can you assume that these deer that are laying here dead, they can't be tested now because they're too decomposed? How do you know they died from CWD?
Yeah, and it's a complicated one because, with EHD or hemorrhagic disease that breaks out in late summer and is caused by biting gnats, death is quick, and it all happens around the same time of year, and deer pile up out there when you have a bad outbreak, and hunters see them. You can smell them. You see them floating in the creeks and the lakes, and it's very visible. People know they've had that impact. CWD doesn't work that way. They don't pile up out like that. They don't die over short periods of time. They don't die fast. And the way the disease debilitates them, they are often hit by a car, brought down by predators, die of pneumonia. The deer in Mississippi actually was killed by pneumonia, even though it had CWD, and CWD was what weakened its immune system and allowed it to contract pneumonia. So it's very, we're never going to be in a situation where hunters look out and go, boy, look at all these deer that died of CWD. It is such a slow creeping poison and kills so slowly that it eats the bottom out of the age structure of the deer herd before anybody really understands what's going on. And that is a challenge to the communication of this issue. We get that. When the deer in Mississippi died, I wrote a whole article about it because here was a case where a hunter watched a deer die and it had CWD. We'd heard that so many times. Show me that a deer has ever died of CWD. I've killed more deer than CWD. We've all heard that. So we actually put a spotlight on that bug and said, here's a deer that died of CWD, and somebody saw it happen, sitting in a deer stand. So we just have to look for those examples and show them as much as we can. There are some good studies coming out. There's some in Wyoming, I know, and some other areas now showing fairly significant, they're reaching points where populations are beginning to decline. It's a mortality question. If you took away hunting mortalities, deer populations with CWD would probably last for a long, long time. They've just got that mortality factor that's not high enough that they can keep reproducing and have a population. It's when you put hunting mortality on top of that you've got too many more mortality factors. Populations begin to decline, and at some point you have to quit hunting. And that's the point we're trying to make to people is this is a long-term thing. What it does over time is take away the ability for us to hunt these deer. It's not going to wipe them out. Whitetails are not going to go extinct. They've been here 4 million years all. This is not going to wipe out whitetails, but it could, in many areas, if we don't control it, prevent us from hunting them. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's a difficult one.
What would your advice be for dealing with information put out by the deer breeders?
They are one of the big groups I'm talking about when I say people spreading misinformation. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them see this as a threat to the economic viability of their industry, and in some cases rightly so. I certainly regret for them that this has created an issue for them that it has for hunters of wild deer, and difficulties for them as well. But how to deal directly with it, I'm not really sure other than what I shared here today. And that is, have your own story, have the facts, have the actions you want people to take, and just keep hammering on those. Treat the deer breeding information just like any other misinformation in that, you ignore it, you don't engage with it, you have your own facts, and you just spend your time constantly transmitting that information to your audiences and remembering that people are hearing you. And I think, like I said, counting all of us together, I think we can swamp. Deer breeders it's shockingly big when you look at how big the industry is and how big it's become. And yet, next to wild deer and wild deer hunting, it's nothing. And so, that's what we have to do is just swamp that. In my opinion,
Okay, so in the sheep and goat industries, they have scrapies, which is the equivalent of CWD in deer. And they're able to take DNA tests to find those animals that are resistant to it. Is there anything on the horizon for doing that with the deer populations?
Everything I've seen on this, if someone knows more, correct me if I'm wrong, but everything I've seen on this, there was some studies in elk, some studies with vaccine, and a new study that just came out not too long ago about some regions of the country, whitetails in some regions being more resistant to CWD. The problem is they are not immune to it. They are merely resistant, and what it means is, in many cases, the deer actually lives longer. It still dies of CWD, it still gets CWD, but it lives longer, and that's actually a negative, because they're on the landscape longer, spreading those prions to other deer in all the ways that those are spread. In the case of some of the vaccine studies with elk, that's what they found was the vaccinated elk still got the disease, but lived longer, right? And I got that right. I see Chuck nodding, so I got a biologist verifying me here. But as I heard Brian Richards with the USGS point out in that study with the vaccines and the elk and other studies like this, technically those were failures in the sense that, man, we didn't get the solution out of that we wanted, but they were not total failures because those scientists learned things in that study from that failure that will give them a leg up when they begin the next study. So it's kind of one of these 2-step forward, 1-step back approach where these scientists, this is the time and the resources that have to be put into this so that they can continue those studies. Every study they learn something, even though it didn't produce a vaccine. Right now, no, we can't say, oh, a vaccine is coming soon unless you are a member of this group in Pennsylvania who thinks it's coming next year. Which, by the way, I marked down on my calendar a year from the day they said it would be due because I'm going to let them know, hey, where's that vaccine? So.
We're blessed in South Carolina right now. We got buffer states all around us. So as communicators, we come up against, we don't want to create an issue that's not there in our state yet. We don't want to we already have declining hunting licenses. We don't want to throw CWD stuff out there and that hurt that more. So how as communicators do we go to our leaders? Do we go to, is there help from QDMA to say, we can keep this out of our state if you let us talk? if that makes sense. Just because we have a state buffering us all the way around, Tennessee is not that far away.
Tennessee's an island. I mean, if you look at the CWD positive states around Tennessee, there's Arkansas, Missouri, but then the rest of it.
Yeah, it's even more important in states that don't have it, like South Carolina, like Georgia, Florida. You know, the Southeast is kind of one of the last holdouts, except for now Mississippi and Western Tennessee. And you know, it is extremely important for those states to stop people to let them know, don't bring deer carcasses from out of state back here. You know, if you hear somebody saying, oh, they know somebody who brought live deer in on the black market to release and improve genetics, you stop that. Have that turned in, report that. These are the kind of things we need our hunters doing. So as far as how you approach your folks, you know, Chuck might want to speak to that because they've got a great campaign going in Alabama right now, Don't Bring It Home, urging their hunters and other folks to not bring deer carcasses into Alabama and help stop CWD from coming there. So Chuck, do you want to speak to that as far as how she would speak to leadership?
Yeah, I can tell you one thing that we did, and we started this a couple of years early, just looking at the carcass regs from other states. The year that Mississippi got it, we started a carcass ban on bringing deer back from CWD positive states. All right, well then when Mississippi became hot, it was during our deer season. We have a lot of hunters that go back and forth. So we had to immediately go back in, revise our regulations, update all of our hunters that, no, now you can't go to Mississippi. So in response to that, we changed our regulations where no state could be brought back in. Well, 6 months later, Tennessee became hot, so we were ahead of the curve a little bit. What your directors need to know is how valuable it is to educate your hunters, because your hunters don't just hunt in South Carolina. We did a joint enforcement detail with Tennessee last year. I think it was the first week of November. Before Tennessee had it, they had a carcass regulation just like we did. We've got billboards up and down 65 on both sides of the line, don't bring it home. All of our hunters were going to the Midwest during the rut in November. In the first hour and a half of that detail, we made 6 arrests. And this was simple. This was just having an officer stand on an overpass, look in the back of a truck or on a four-wheeler at a whole deer laying there. This wasn't some counterintelligence undercover. That was disappointing that we made 6 arrests in an hour and a half, but what was more disappointing is every one of them admitted they knew what they were doing was illegal. So when we caught them in Alabama, they had violated Alabama law, they had violated Tennessee law, and a half a dozen other states on the way through, and we had deer, whole deer, from 3 different CWD positive states. So your directors need to know, they can call me. You need to get ahead of this. Sticking your head in the sand isn't gonna fix it. You don't want to scare your people, but you need to inform them because there is so much misinformation out there. I personally did about 40 seminars around the state year before last, just trying to get ahead of the misinformation and let people know we're not scaring you to death. We just want you to know the truth.
Yeah, this is where, again, pointing to what you can do is extremely important, and that's one of the things we've said is not just, okay, the hunters that heard our message, we're glad you heard it, but what about your brother, what about your sister, your whoever that hunts, fishes, travels, whatever it is, if they're going to, have you talked to them? If they killed a deer out of state, have you asked them if they're getting it tested? Make sure, in your social networks, reach out to the people you know, but also be proactive. If you see a deer going down the highway on the back of a truck, and you see them approaching the state line, call the conservation officer. Be proactive, and more than just making sure every hunter out there knows what to do the right thing, but like in the case where Chuck said, people doing it even though they knew they shouldn't, well, we hope somebody else knows to report it.
Public service announcement, if I may. This is a great session and an important topic, but it's not one that we had anybody sign up to write a summary on for the balance wheel. We just had more subjects than we had authors at the time. So if anyone here took a good set of notes and would like to write a summary for the balance wheel, you'll earn stars in your crown. So, thank you.
All right, well, please have lunch with me, Lindsay, because I have many more questions, but I'm gonna let everybody go to lunch. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.